So our speaker tonight, Vallari Talapatra, happens to be a library board member and has worked closely with us to design our brand new garden. It's at the main entrance of the library, and we are calling it a place to grow garden. So if you haven't been to the library recently, next time you come, definitely check it out. It contains native plants, prairie grasses, pollinators, and propagators, a shade garden, and a beautiful winding stone path. And we're also going to be featuring a little free seed library soon where you can come and take seeds home with you to plant. And we will be unveiling the garden with Vallari right at the start of our summer kickoff on June 11th at 1 p.m. So definitely stop by before you get an ice cream treat. And a little bit more about Vallari. She's the president of EcoScapes Incorporated, which focuses on design and implementation of natural landscaping solutions. She also teaches at the Morton Arboretum and College of DuPage and previously taught landscape design in the School of Continuing Studies at Northwestern University. Tonight, she will explain design cues that create places that nurture the spirit and invite us to linger, relax, and contemplate. Thank you so much, Vallari. I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Courtney, and welcome to all of you for this evening session of how to design a meditative garden. I'm hoping that you guys can take some of this into your own spaces. So I'm going to actually start by trying to answer these three questions. Why do you want a meditative garden? What is a meditative garden? And how would you go about actually incorporating in a meditative garden? So to answer the first question, one basically needs to figure out why do you actually meditate in a garden? So that would answer the question why. So I just kind of wanted to break down this whole concept of the meditative garden before I exposed you all to the different elements that go along to create a meditative space in our backyards. So let's just kind of go through these points so it'll become a little bit more clearer as to why we choose a garden setting. A garden allows us to relax and unwind. A garden is a place where you can actually observe the miracles of life, of permanence and change. A garden allows for an extraordinary partnership with nature. It's also a microcosm, which sort of allows us to connect to the larger whole. And it awakens the senses, thereby letting us connect to our souls. So I find this really antique poster very fascinating. It says, "And into the garden I go to lose my mind and find my soul." And that basically brings me to the elements of a meditative garden. And my background is that of a landscape architect. And so I have, spent about 20 years teaching about meditative gardens. However, in the last few years, I've noticed that a lot of my clients have asked me to include a small space for meditative, for meditation, or a tiny area that they can find some tranquility in. So that's the reason why I feel that, I can help you maybe understand what some of these elements are that you could maybe incorporate in your own spaces to have this sort of a tranquil space. I have actually about 90 slides, so you're gonna see me rushing through some, and it's essentially to keep the idea flowing. I will be actually focusing more on these 6 elements that I've put together for you. And the way I've kind of brought these elements to light is simply because when I design gardens, I've noted that these are some of the things that actually go really well together, hand in hand, to create a space of tranquility. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and actually talk about each of these elements. So let me just go through and um, make sure that you understand um, what each of these are. So there's nature, water, sanctuary, balance, destination, journey. So I've kind of combined destination and journey together. And then the last one is symbolism. So nature, water, sanctuary, the first three, those are pretty tangible. And as the words describe, you are probably familiar with what water could be or what sanctuary could be, what nature is. The last three, however, balance, destination, and journey, and symbolism is a little bit more intangible. So it might require a little bit more of understanding what each of these things are. Like, for instance, how do you bring balance in the landscape? How do you incorporate the idea of symbolism in a garden? So with that, let me get started with the first element, which is nature. And it's the most integral component of any garden. And in a meditative garden, it takes on an added importance because you can connect with nature in basically three essential ways. You can either be enjoying nature, which is to mean that you can be looking at the garden, appreciating its colors and textures and layers, and the four season impact that it creates. Or you could be using nature or gardening as a therapeutic act. So some of my clients really like to get down and dirty and do a lot of the plantings on their own. They would ask me to create a design, and then they want to implement it themselves. So people who are who want to connect to the earth in a very direct way and in a mindful way, you can use gardening as a therapeutic act. Um, so for instance, the mindless task of reading can be very grounding to many and can be actually incorporated in designing a garden that's rich in texture for the client, but also is really therapeutic for them because it involves a lot of weeding. And the third way to connect with nature is to actually live with nature. So there are clients of mine who really like to be surrounded by the garden as a habitat. So they like to truly observe nature as a microcosm, and from wondering about the how the inflorescence of a milkweed can really incorporate the monarch butterfly, or to by admiring the different birds that might be in your garden. So all of those go hand in hand with living in nature. So when you're enjoying nature, you're basically looking at it. So if you are familiar with the Frank Lloyd Wright's garden and house in Taliesin East in Wisconsin, this is a shot from his picture window looking out. Similarly, like in one of my clients' yard, there's this really old sweet gum tree, and right underneath it there's a chair that she just uses to look out at the garden. So whenever you're basically looking out at the garden and enjoying nature, that's something where you're looking and appreciating the different textures, and that itself can be very therapeutic. Similarly, as I mentioned, gardening as a meditative act itself can be used and incorporated within your gardens. And lastly, living with nature. And these are pictures from a habitat garden that I designed for a client of mine in Oswego. And you can see that the different layers and textures and incorporating in sitting areas nestled literally inside a wild space or inside a savanna or like a prairie. that would be something where, the client is really surrounded by all the lovely things that nature has to offer. And this is another shot of something like that, where you're totally immersed in nature, where you're appreciating the seasons, you're just completely enamored by the awesomeness of the earth sky connections, and you're really appreciating the different elements of nature. So nature, since it's very all encompassing, I kind of wanted to break it down in these different elements of it. So there's basically 4 elements within nature that we can break it down at: earth, water, air, and fire. And all of these have different things within each of them that can be incorporated in your landscape. So under earth, we have trees, plants, ground covers. We have stones, gravel, dirt. And you can also include things like flagstones or even stone sculptures or anything like that within the earth element. Within the water element, we can incorporate water in ways that are where it's flowing, in ways where it's falling, or it could just be a bowl of water that has a reflective quality. Under air, you can incorporate things like wind sculptures or wind chimes, and you can also do ornamental grasses, which actually sway in the wind, and you can actually even hear them swaying. And the last element, fire, you can incorporate that by actually including things like fire bowls or fire pits, sometimes even doing torches, or incorporating in plants, and even like ornamental grasses that can actually harness the sunlight, or during sunset hours, you can actually see the glistening, glowing leaves or the blades of grass, and you can bring in fire in that way. So the element of earth, water, air, and fire has to be brought into your garden in a very mindful way. So you need to be doing this in a way where you're incorporating these elements in close combination with other things that we are going to be talking about. Because remember, in a meditative garden, nature is not the only thing. There's going to be other factors that go into making your space a more tranquil one. But within nature, you have these 4 elements, and you can pick and choose which ones you want to incorporate in your own gardens. With earth, you have things like the Native Americans who created immense spiritually charged landscape, with these mounds that are called the effigy mounds. And then you also have this type of earth sculpting that occurred in 1000 BC with the stone circles that we see in Ireland, a similar kind of sacred mounds that you see in Japanese gardens, and also in the Celtic gardens of the 15th and the 16th century. So when you think about these elements of the hallowed ground, as we call them, you can see how these mounds have been used. And in Japan, these mounds are called kofun, the Japanese mounds. But these sort of sacred landscapes have always used mounds kind of almost as an archetype of the mountain. And basically what happens when you do something like that is you're kind of harnessing the power of earth itself. In other words, you're kind of making sure that you are actually including the element of earth in your landscape. In a much more simplified way, the way I would try to have you guys bring earth into your meditative gardens would be to just maybe include stones, because stones are another really huge component of the earth element. And stones, by the way, are a way to signify permanence. And because of the uh, complete sort of yin and yang that stones pose, with things that are fleeting, like, you have your spring ephemerals that just come and go within weeks. And here's one big boulder that's going to stay through the 4 seasons and give you that permanence, that way of having that element that's going to stay with you forever in your garden, if you choose for it to be that way. Stones bring an element that is really very, very powerful in your meditative space. And the way you place your stones can matter. So sometimes you need to, do stones in a way that are subtle. And sometimes they can be more direct. Like sometimes you might be using stones to actually make them function as a retaining wall, or sometimes you're using it as an accent to signify something. But many times you can just use stones more subtly to just be more symbolic, or just be something of a companion to other things. Like in this situation, you can see with moss or with ground cover, you're also adding the stone element. One really clear way of using stones, of course, is just using stepping stones. So if you have a pathway or anything else that you're going to be approaching, like in this situation, you can see in this garden, there's a stepping stone going through here. That becomes a functional element as well as a symbolic element. So in a Zen garden, however, this is in Ruanji, Kyoto. It's a 14th century garden, and it was done in sort of carefully controlled settings of raked sand or rocks and precisely clipped shrubs. And the symbolism of the stones in a Zen garden is one of the most important design elements. And I think moss on stone also enhances the feeling of tranquility in a space, because you can actually touch and feel the moss. And moss is actually a really interesting plant, because it grows without roots, flowers, or stems. And it provides year-round color, however, and excels in like really difficult circumstances. It also prevents soil erosion, by the way. And it's a really great plant, and that's what is you can see on the right side on the screen. And these are just other ways to incorporate boulders or stones in your landscape. Here you can see it's surrounding a pond. Here you can see outcroppings. So on the right side, you see circular granite boulders. On the left, you're seeing the outcroppings, which are limestone and incorporated in this is a savanna that we planted. And then you can see it being incorporated in a quiet setting. So you have the oak trees, and then you have this setting here with the stones and the raked, this is decomposed granite. So from the boulders and the stones, I'm going to now go to discussing trees. Trees are actually more easy to understand for most people, because everybody likes to sit under a tree. And trees are symbolic to both shelter and life. And trees can be a source of endless fascination in a garden. Like if you had an ornamental tree, like a Japanese maple, or even like a serviceberry or something, it can very quickly become a focal point in your yard as well. But trees can actually also be ultimate sanctuaries, and if you have enough of them to create like a woodland area, you could also be thinking about things like forest bathing. Forest bathing is obviously a concept that's imported again from Japan. And what it means is it's an intentional immersion in a woodland area and you're immersing yourself in that woodland area to really actually focus inward. Being under a tree, so here you can see this is actually in the Herrick Lake Forest Preserve. You have that little wooden bench or sitting area under that beautiful tree. And I actually find a lot of solace in just that. So sometimes just having simply the canopy of the tree as your sanctuary can be enough. And being under a tree makes you focus on the present, and that is what actually calms you down. So and the slide on the left is one of my pictures that I took at the St. James Forest Preserve, and you can see that this is a January shot with the snow on the arms of these the white oak. And the tree is something that you can actually be fascinated by in all 4 seasons. It's when you're picking a tree for your yard, make sure that you're doing justice in terms of thinking about all the 4 seasons. So do not forget the winter season when the leaves drop. What is the shape of the tree? That should be important to you. And just sometimes placing the tree in a location where you can see it from the inside of your house can give you that connection again to nature. So the aspect of trees can also be have that similar kind of sanctuary effect and calming effect in urban spaces. These are both shots in the heart of New York City. This is Madison Garden and Madison Square Park. And here you can see that the trees, again, the canopies themselves provides this amazing greenery and safe space. And then also on the other shot, you can see how having benches along that, and you can see this is right in the heart of the Flatiron District, and these are sycamores. This is a December photograph, so you can see all the trees are bare, but it gives you the idea of how important trees are even in an urban setting. And even within the hustle and bustle of a city, people sit under the bench, these sycamores on a bench and find their meditative spot. These are again pictures from different yards that I've done through the years, and you can see how having the fire element, like a fire pit, or just relaxing with, this is a pond over here with water around it. So you can combine trees with all these different elements of nature, like fire, water, earth, pretty easily. Like here you can see just flagstones within a very wooded area of one of my clients' backyards. And then even with the retreat, designing a retreat in the woods, you can bring in the concept of forest bathing and what I just spoke of, where you can just really very intentionally immerse yourself within nature, within a wooded area. And these are all just pictures again from some of my installations. And in much smaller backyards, when you don't have the luxury or the liberty to actually have a whole wooded area for yourself to do forest bathing, you don't have to worry about it. You can just do it under one tree. You don't have to have a number of different trees. But the concept of having that space under the tree can really actually, can really actually put your mind at ease. And at the end of the day, a meditative garden is really used for self-reflection. It is basically a space where you can be still. And the concept of the outdoor room really kind of goes hand in hand with understanding how we use the different things like trees, shrubs, and ground cover. And the outdoor room is basically consisting of if you think about the room, you have walls, ceiling, and the floor, right? So if you look at nature and an outdoor room, the way we look at trees is the tree canopy is providing you the ceiling. The wall is all of the vertical elements. So like a shrub layer could become a wall. And then the floor, which is in this case, that's the mulch, is your floor. So the mulch or the ground cover will become the floor. The anything that's vertical, your shrub layer, or if it's a fence, or if it's a low wall, or just a boxwood hedge, those become the wall. And then the ceiling is provided with the trees. Now the air element can be a little bit more tricky to bring into your yard, but you can certainly do that with like kinetic sculptures that kind of give you, since you cannot see, air is invisible to us, right? So if it's something that's that invisible and you're trying to incorporate in your yard, you would have to do it with other things, obviously. For instance, the swaying branches of a tree, or the swaying grasses. Ornamental grasses are a great way to get the air aspect into your yard, or kinetic sculptures, or wind chimes. This is a beautiful garden designed with wind chimes. And the thing about wind chimes is wind chimes produce inharmonic sounds and are used as meditation medium. So the soothing sort of white noise of melody. High quality meditation medium wind chimes were hung in this particular installation. And wind chimes can be made of metal or wood, and it can be in different shapes. You can have them shaped as rods or as tubes, or and basically they provide a calming effect, and they generate a meditative feeling that engages our senses, and not just the sense of hearing. Obviously, listening to wind chimes can reduce stress and promote relaxation. And one of the things that people have found is it actually can unlock emotional stress and bring feelings of inner peace and a sense of balance. So wind chimes can actually be seriously helpful in a meditative garden. You just have to kind of have the right type of wind chime. So you might want to actually go and really listen to them before you buy them. Like, so this is something where if you were to buy it online, it might not really work out, because you want to make sure that they have the right kind of sound that's emanating from them. But here you can see how the wind chime kind of circulates, or is kind of surrounding this whole pool area. So there's an element of water, there's the element of air, and obviously the element of earth that's also brought into the space. Which brings me again to the last element, which is fire. Now, fire pits are actually really popular these days. And as you light up the fire pit, you begin by slowing down your attention and being present, and center your focus on the fire itself. And then you can also actually let your gaze relax and observe the color changes in the flame. And one of the things that you can also do with fire is you can actually hear it. You can not just feel the heat that's coming from the flame, you can also hear the sound of the fire. And basically these mindfulness practices help us develop this stronger sense of focus and results in reducing our anxiety. So the other thing that fire does is it generates warmth, and warmth is a reminder of the love that surrounds us. So that's the reason why the element of fire in some way is kind of a good one to have in your meditative space, especially if you're wanting to kind of really focus on love, and one of the ways that you can get this fire into the yard is by actually not just doing these fire pits. And you can see here how fire pits can be small and sort of very organic shaped. And in this particular context, you can see that it's in a public space, so it's much larger, almost like a council ring. So the fire circles is how I would call the one that's to the left, and the fire pit to the right are the sort of ways that we all kind of understand how we can bring the element of fire. But there's this other thing that has become really popular now, which is sunset meditation. So what is sunset meditation? It's to kind of be cognizant of the, in your own yards, look to the west, see where the sun is setting, and then incorporate in, like here you can see ornamental grasses in a row, right? So when you do something like ornamental grasses or something that has a flame color, like I use a lot of the flame grass, which is Miscanthus purpurascens. It's a kind of Miscanthus grass, which has the, sort of almost like a red color, or like any of the switchgrass, the red switch grasses. Any of the reds that let the sun come in and almost looks like it's fire. So, sunset is actually a great time to anyway settle down and meditate. And so people have now started actually including the idea of sunset meditation in their garden, and they are focusing on the west side of their yard and seeing what's going on. What is going on the west? How can I trap the sunset? How can I look at sunset and get that mindfulness? So that is actually a kind of a nuanced way of looking at fire. But I club the sunset meditations under fire because it's actually, kind of respecting or honoring the sun. And the sun is obviously the most giant source of warmth that we have. Then I come to the last element, and I left the last element as water, because water is the easiest one for everybody to understand. If there's one thing that people know, hey, if I want to do a tranquil space or a meditative garden, I need a little bit of water. That is something that everybody understands. And so just a little bit of history about water. So water has been used in houses of worship for its cleansing property. And all through, like starting in the Middle Ages through the Renaissance, you can see that water, has always been a really prominent part of every garden design. But one of the things that I want to also bring to your attention is that a body of water actually is its own ecology, and it can also take up its own shape. And the fact that water takes the shape of a container it's in shows its pliable nature, and which is shown in this slide right here. So water is taking the shape of the container, as you can see. And I just kind of like to incorporate this poster because I just think that that's so apt. And it's Bruce Lee's slogan that says, "Be like water." And in the Eastern religions, the flowing nature of water is really revered. And its strength basically comes from its flexibility and its fluidity. This flowing water also produces a soothing sound, and this soothing sound makes our senses more aware. And the sound of water is actually used in music as well, as you know. And it's when you put on any kind of soothing sound, or if you look for soothing music, folks are using the sound of water quite a bit. Sometimes rain, sometimes repetitive sounds of waves, sometimes oceans, and sometimes just trickling water. So when I kind of sum it all up, these are the different things that we're looking at water for, which is the shape of water, sound of water, its reflective nature, and its cleansing property. And in terms of the shape of water, as I said, water can take any shape. So you can, it can be circle, it can be square, it can be flowing. The sound of water, as I said, you could have a trickling sound, you can have a gushing sound, you can have a babbling brook, any of those would work. And then you have the reflective quality of water, which is also a great source of wonder and amazement. And it can be just still water. And in still water, they say why is still water revered so much? It's because just like a mirror, right, reflects and your true self emerges. Similarly, in a pool of water, all is revealed, they say. So it just kind of gives you that zone of calm, if you will. So on the right, you see a tiny urn, which is reflecting water. On the left, you see a skinny pool of water that's reflecting. So you can actually even find the reflective property of water in larger water bodies. This is in the Brooklyn Botanical Garden, and you can see the cherry blossom being reflected. So, and when you see something like this, it just really grounds you, and it really makes you contemplate and brings a sense of stillness within you. And the whole purpose of meditation is to calm yourself, is to make yourself still, and to make yourself aware. So when you look at the reflective properties of water, you can kind of understand why that becomes an important part in the meditative space. Sometimes, if you are not able to bring water in, you can have a symbolic, something that symbolizes water. Like often people would use things like irises, like the blue iris, or sometimes even reflecting balls, like you see these mirrored balls. And because again, it's reflecting things back at you, it has that kind of similar reflective properties of water. Now that we are done with the nature element, I'm going to the second element, which is sanctuary. Again, sanctuary is a pretty tangible element, and I'm hoping that most of you understand just from the word what I'm going to be saying. But when you look at the word sanctuary in the dictionary, these are the different meanings that come. And this is just something that I've done as a research. And look at all the words that come up as you just type in sanctuary: refuge, haven, harbor, oasis, park, altar, reserve, shrine, sanctum. And the reason why I'm reading this out is to make you aware of how many of these words actually have references in the garden setting. So basically, if I were to sum it up, it's a sanctuary is a safe space that's private and understanding, and that lets you go inward. So basically, I would say that the Japanese tea room could be one such place, which is very private. It could be a little, back porch or like a courtyard space. It could be a gazebo. It could be a pergola. Any of these things can become a sanctuary for you. So like a gazebo like that, even something that's like a shed or like a pergola like this, those all of these are examples of sanctuary. Sanctuaries can also be in a front yard, as you can see. So here, my clients wanted something in their front yard where they could sit, and I created the space for them. And really, this is how this is their space now. And they told me that it's kind of become their sanctuary. That's the word they used. And so I wanted to kind of make you aware that sanctuary doesn't have to be in your backyards. It can just be like a semi-private place, and it can also be in your front yard. But what is really important in a sanctuary is the sense of scale. So for instance, if you have on the right a 40 feet high wall with a small, 20-inch height chair, it's not going to really give you that sense of scale. you need the whatever's on your back needs to be something that's more to scale. So basically you need to feel comfortable, is what it is. So like here, if you see this blank wall, if I were to plant some arborvitaes that are about 8 to 10 feet, then you would suddenly have that harbor effect, what you're seeing over here. So the reason why we like to have things in our back is because it gives us that archetype of a harbor, and a harbor is usually a safe space. And basically, when you want to think about carving out a space, you can start to understand the meaning of sanctuary. So when you're thinking about a sanctuary, you can also think about how you dig out space from a solid. And similarly here, you can see what's been created. Like I've literally carved out a little space within this garden to create a little private space. And these kind of subspaces is what I call them, subspaces, because these are spaces that are taken from the larger whole, from the larger context of the garden. So this is a yard. This is, I think this was in Palatine, and the larger yard. And I, again, stole a little bit of space, or I carved out a little bit of space and provided a little sanctuary. Or like here, in an urban space, carve out a little spot and make it a little area for your clients. This notion of making a subspace, or like a smaller space within your garden, is kind of like the key thing that you need to be thinking about. So think about a space that in your yard that speaks to you. Maybe it could be a corner. People usually go to a corner when they're trying to create a meditative space, but it doesn't have to be in a corner. It could be it could be a elevated spot, for instance, or it could be a sunken garden or a sunken space, if you can think about it that way. But it needs to be like a spot that speaks to you, that says, okay, this is where I want to create my meditative spot. Like here, you can again see the whole concept of carving out this space. So you have the lawn area, and then you come to this private little area. So if I were to show you in this kind of a three-dimensional way in a plan, so you have the larger context of the yard, and then you have this little carved space in there that becomes your meditative corner. Now that brings me to the next element, which is destinations, journey. And within that, basically, you're creating a special entrance to your sanctuary. And the reason to do that entrance is because you want to be able to escape into a different space. So the whole concept of going away is important when you're thinking about a meditative space. So you're escaping into nature, or you're entering into a different space. All of those concepts include the whole concept of a threshold. And the threshold can be just a garden gate. It can be an arbor structure. It can be a tree that's leaning one way. Basically, you can, the whole idea of this is to discard your worries at the gate, and you're going to be kind of entering the zone. And as you're entering the zone, you can start to elevate your mood. And that is why, like, sometimes you can either, like here, you can see with this particular yard, again, this is one of the yards that I created with different levels in it, but you can see how I've kind of elevated this little meditative space, right? Or here, there are steps going into that meditative space. Or like just having this whole concept of the pathway to give you that idea of journey and the destination. In this situation, I'm taking the pathway into this flagstone area, which is kind of used as my meditative garden. Now, all the while also taking care of water issues. So this is kind of a rain garden in the back. And then I have this walkway coming in and doing this. And also I wanted to incorporate the whole idea of this journey concept that I've used in the this Wheaton Public Library, the front garden that Courtney mentioned. And you can see the Fibonacci spiral in there. And the Fibonacci spiral is basically found in nature. It's a sequence of numbers, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and 21, 44. And it's basically, it's a connection to an irrational number. And so I've used that in many of my projects. It's kind of something that I find useful because it helps you to kind of walk in a mindful way, because there's a certain mathematical order in the Fibonacci spiral. It gives you that mindfulness. In general, walkways can be both narrow or wide. Serpentine walkways are really useful in a meditative garden because it allows you to have that hide and seek aspect. Also, something that's really useful in the meditative space is to have that mindful walking concept, which you can find in a labyrinth or in chakras or mandalas. All of those actually have that sense of balance and that sense of order. So you're basically walking with a purpose. It's a very intentional walk that you're doing. And while you're doing that intentional walk, you're focusing inward. And that's where you're becoming more mindful. That's how you meditate. So, there is a concept called kinhin in the Japanese garden, which basically means walking meditation. And so a lot of these walkways that have like patterns incorporated within it, or like here it's these stones that are kind of actually raised up, and these are intentionally raised up. So you have to actually watch your step as you're walking, otherwise you're going to trip. So and then notice this little gateway at the back. So again, it's you walk to the space and then you enter, and as you enter, you're ready to enter the next journey. Similarly here, there's a portal into that other space. So that's how you kind of bring about that feeling of journey and destination. And similarly, I use bridges a lot in a lot of my um, mixed borders, particularly if the borders are really wide. And if I'm incorporating a little meditative space where there's a walking path, I do that quite often. Here you can see me doing that with this shallow bridge, and then there's like a water swale over here, but that connects you to the this bed, beyond. In this particular instance, again, there's a bridge here that brings you to this little meditative spot, and here as well. This is a walking pathway or walking garden, like a Japanese garden in the front yard. This is for a client of mine whose son has autism, and he wanted me to incorporate a walking garden in his front yard, and that's what I did. And this brings me basically to the, now we are left with two more elements, the sense of balance and symbolism. And I've included the slide of this front yard because sense of balance is, like I said, an intangible concept. And it basically incorporates the three principles of design or landscape design that I use regularly: unity, order, and rhythm. And your meditative gardens need to have order. And the way you get that is by layering the vegetation in the right way. So, or you can connect the subspace to the larger whole in the right way, or creating a sense of order through a strong form of geometry. Geometry can bring a huge amount of calm, a huge amount of balance, and a huge amount of order. Simple lines can do the same thing. So whenever you have a design which has very simple organizing principles, right off the bat, you're going to be creating balance in your landscape. You're going to be bringing that sense of balance that's really intentional. And by doing these simple lines, the other thing that you're doing is you're kind of trying to control nature. You're trying to kind of make sure that nature is also aligned, and all of the other busy stuff that's going on there's again that yin and yang aspect of the busyness of nature, that some things are coming up while some are dying, but then it's getting controlled by this organizing principle of geometry. So you can have a really a lovely curvilinear form. It doesn't have to be square, it can be curvilinear. It can be, again, here you can see this calm geometry of the grass being surrounded by, this is all prairie. This is in Prairie Crossing, one of my clients' yards. And but that this again, incorporating an order in the landscape gives you the ability to appreciate the busyness that comes with the busy quality of nature. And here you can see natural order. This is in one of my clients' yards where I incorporated in stone and then use textural contrast. So when you have fine textured grasses contrasted with bold foliage, and then the incorporation of boulders and then the smaller pebbles, you can see that whole generation of or the whole gamut of the different textures that's going on. And if you look up in the same space, you have these oak trees up top and some other, understory trees, and you see the sense of natural order. And so you can see in nature itself, you have this amazing balance of layers and textures. And if you can incorporate that similar balance of textures and layers in your landscape, you're going to have that balance. You're going to have that balanced look. And I wanted to incorporate this slide because you don't have to have a large garden, by the way, to do that. You could do that same thing in a small planter. You can do that same thing in a bed. You can see the play of these sort of dark leafed foliage contrasted with these, and this dark leaf foliage is very spiky. And then you have, sort of like the more slightly more fine textured salvia. And then you're contrasting it with something that's kind of really ground hugging and creeping, like this stacky. So you're basically contrasting the layers and textures, and you can do that in a tiny small bed, and you don't have to have a lot. Similarly, you can see the same sense of balance being incorporated in these particular planting beds. If you it basically incorporates in, again, the textures with the lime colored spirea. Then you have the grasses, then you have the purple leaf barberries, and then this is kind of like the spring picture. Here, let me show you. This is the sort of June picture, and the one on the top is a October picture. So you can see how sometimes that balance can carry through the 4 seasons. And if there's one thing you need to do with your meditative space, is you need to uncomplicate it. And one way to uncomplicate it is to have simplicity, simple lines. And the way you do that is by bringing in geometry. Simple lines, repeating patterns, all of these can generate tranquility. And so in order to do that, sometimes I've done that with like incorporating time with flagstones, like you can see on the right, or like using, grass and bluestone. So to kind of sum it up, you want to make sure that you bring in balance in the landscape with, and you can use any of the elements. It doesn't have to be just plant materials. You could do it with stone. You could also do it with your own walkways. Walkways can generate a lot of balance as well. And then that brings me to the last element, which is symbols and meanings. And symbolism is essentially a way for you to bring your own personal meaning to the meditative garden. How do you personalize your space? Certain patterns are universal, and this universality of pattern can be seen in, for instance, the Fibonacci spiral, which I spoke about just shortly before. And the golden ratio that, for instance, Frank Lloyd Wright used, or like you see in the paintings of the Leonardo da Vinci, they're all using the same golden ratio, by the way, that you see in the human body or in the pyramids of Egypt. And then this is in a Chelsea garden show, this same Fibonacci spiral that you can see. This is a really great way to demonstrate that um, this particular garden demonstrated this algorithm of the Fibonacci spiral, and it's kind of the underpinning of all growth, really. You see that in the shells, you see it in the fronds of fern, and it's kind of a pattern that everybody recognizes. Um, but there are other things that you can do. I mean, you can have your own personal touches. You weave in your own story into the garden. You can put in found objects. You can use sacred stones, things that are sacred to you. You can do patterns that are meaningful to you. So all of this is being done for one singular purpose, which is that you're trying to honor the space. You're trying to bring value to the space, and you're adding your own whimsy. You maybe you found something during your travels or in an art fair or somewhere else, or it's something that you've cherished because it belonged to your grandmother and you're placing it in your own garden. And this is, for instance, a stone that one of my clients brought back all the way from China. She got it shipped, and we made a meditative space for her to incorporate that stone in. These are just some other examples of things that some of my clients have that I've incorporated in multiple different ways in the garden. And so sometimes this kind of symbolic aspect not only brings you tranquility, but it can also bring you joy, just simple joy. And that's what art in the garden does. And in this particular garden, you can see the folding hands. So I created this walkway coming in into this meditative space and then going out. You can see me harnessing some of the sun angles. This is the west sun comes from here. So you can see the clumps of the grasses, and then you can see the folded hands statue, which is more like a prayer garden type thing that I created. Now, the feeling of tranquility can be harnessed in Zen gardens, and they are done by actually repeating patterns, like you can see with the raked sand. And these stones actually, the gravel signifies river. The raked sand is the sea. The outcroppings are mountains, and the walkways are passages through it. So all of these things can have symbolic meanings in a Zen garden, but also in like Celtic gardens. You see the harbor archetype playing with this backing of these stones, sticks, sorry. This shelter is made with all sticks. So in Celtic gardens, you see a lot of incorporation of sticks and stones together. And obviously the stone, this kind of a opening is also used sometimes in Chinese gardens, but the use of stones and cairns that you see in Celtic gardens is also an important aspect. And then using circles and chakras and mandalas. Mandalas are used by people that do a lot of vegetable gardening, because in a small space you can get a lot of plants in, and similarly in the chakra gardens too, you can do that. But all of these things can start to have much more meaning when you delve into it and find out what if that symbolism actually works for you. At the end of the day, you need to kind of be able to awaken your senses to the sense of smell, touch, taste, look, and listen. So I'm going to basically talk about my favorite flower, the lavender, and kind of show you how lavender is used, for all of these. So you can pause and inhale it. So you smell it, and you can touch and feel it. You can walk on it, and you can obviously also incorporate it in your eating garden. So you can actually eat it. And then for heightened visuals, so like when you're looking at a garden and you're heightening your visual, that's another way to kind of remind yourself and to awaken your senses. layers and textures do the same thing for us. And in a lush garden, you're diffusing the sound. So whenever you want a meditative quality in your yard, make sure you have enough layers and textures to diffuse sound and make it a quieter space and a quieter sanctuary. And you want to be able to listen to your garden, so incorporate in maybe birds, hummingbirds and grasses, things like that. And these heightened senses allow you to discover yourself. That's what heightened senses does. So that's the reason why you want to kind of really awaken all your senses. So with that, I kind of want to end with kind of questioning you about what your inward garden should be. Where will you want to sit? Kind of try to think about that. Like, do you want to be kind of creating a little carved space? Do you want to be sitting at a slightly elevated space? Do you want to be sitting under something, or maybe in front of something, more like a harbor? What will you walk on? So do you want to walk on stone? Do you want to walk on mulch? And basically, in this particular context, I just wanted to show you a before and an after of something that I was able to create. Again, a walkway that goes through all these different beds and then becomes a Fibonacci spiral. And that's what the garden looks like in the second year. And you can see the incorporation of a strong geometric form to kind of, again, balance out all of the chaotic nature of this, layered landscape that I was trying to create. These are some more views of that. This is, again, harnessing the sun. Like I said, the sunset meditation is something that's really powerful. And then also to be awed by the micro and the macro. So to have that earth sky connection, right? So this is like a tiny little fairy garden in a bowl, but then you see the larger context of the garden, and not to mention this borrowed landscape or the borrowed feature of the oak tree, which belongs to her neighbor, my client's neighbor. And she can now see it clearly from this junction point where I've created like a little sitting area. So with that, I just kind of want to, again, reiterate that these 6 elements, nature, water, sanctuary, destination, journey, balance, and symbol. So these 6 together can really give you the meditative space that you're requiring for yourself. So with that, I am happy to answer some questions.
Thank you so much, Valerie. If anyone has any questions, you can put them in the Q&A or the chat. We did have one question about where you're teaching, but I believe I answered it. Morton Arboretum in College of DuPage.
Yes.
And another reminder, if you are at the library anytime soon, definitely check out our wonderful, beautiful new garden to see how these elements are incorporated in, since Valerie helped design it. Okay, I don't see any questions. Last chance, anyone? Okay, I do not see any. Oh, what are the names of your courses?
Okay. So I think the next one that I'm teaching at the Arboretum is on, I think it's called Garden Reboot. It's usually I do them as like a series of workshops. So some of the topics that I cover are like rain gardens, Garden Reboot. I just finished one actually at the Arboretum for curb appeal. And then I do the meditative garden, by the way, the meditative garden workshop, and that's like a 3-week workshop. And I don't know when we are going to be doing that one next. But I do know that there's something coming up pretty shortly here at the Arboretum. I don't remember the dates, but that's, and at COD, the courses that I teach are landscape design 1, landscape graphics, and then I'm going to be starting this coming spring. I will also be doing the landscape design 2 class.
Wonderful. And so everyone can probably take a look at those schedules on the Morton
Yeah.
Arboretum and COD's website. Next question, fabulous presentation. Any ideas for a condo's backyard with strict HOA rules?
Yeah, I would say that any of these, if you can bring in like 3 of the 6 even into your, space, you should be in, you should be in uh, a good place, because at the end of the day, it's hard to, do everything. But I would say that bringing nature into your balcony or any other small space is pretty easy, right? You can bring in nature in any form, really. Like it could be just plants, it could be stones, and you don't have to have the entire gamut of things that we covered within nature. It could just be a couple of them. And in terms of like, the air aspect, you could certainly have like wind chimes, or even like some kinetic sculptures on floating on the balcony, something like that. And then last but not the least, I would say that having something symbolic would really help. So, and when you're doing all of this, the sense of that the fifth element, which is balance, when you think about doing any space, even if it's a tiny little balcony, think about what I said about balance, right? So give yourself that concept of uncomplicated. So try to make it simple, and then layer it. So have like a really clean main form, and then kind of build it up, so that there is like a zone of calm. If it's all, everything is too busy, then you're not going to appreciate it. So remember the element of balance as you're creating your sanctuary space.
Thank you. And I don't see any more questions. So I think that's a good place to stop. Thank you so much, Vallari, for this very informative presentation. And I think we can all take some of that away into our own spaces, in our own backyard spaces. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.